Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2500, Chapter 3, Ethical and Legal Considerations in Counseling. Alright, so let's just start about the intro. Counseling is a profession guided by ethics, laws, and professional standards. Associations provide support, increase visibility, and motivate interest in professional identity. So when we say the word association, we're basically meaning like organizations in the field. Codes and standards are living documents that change with the needs of the public and client. In that phrase, living documents basically means that it's going to change or is open to changing often if necessary. Counselors are also subject to local, state, and federal laws. So let's talk a little bit about the background and the basic concepts. So ethics is a branch of moral philosophy. Ask basic questions about the good life, about what is better and worse, about whether there is any objective wrong or right, and how we know if there is. Professional ethics is basically that, but agreed upon rules, principles, and standards that govern appropriate conduct and define acceptable practices in various professional fields. So you guessed it, in counseling, we do have our own ethical code of conducts. Individuals and groups have beliefs about what is right and wrong, about what is ethical and unethical. There's a complex way humans create interpersonal boundaries and make choices. So what that is saying is that humans, because we are such high level thinking creatures, there are things that can be very, very complicated. Ethical dilemmas are not easily solved because of how life is so multifaceted. Multifaceted basically means that there's just so many perspectives, so many issues that can occur in any situation. So for example, it would be an abortion or capital punishment, which is basically punishing a person through legal issues such as, let's say, the death penalty. And then also euthanasia. And euthanasia is when basically you let someone die because of, let's say, they have a terminal death or something like a death that, or a life where the person might be in a vegetative state or in a coma for the rest of their lives. Then do we let this person die because they might not survive without, let's say, a machine that's helping them breathe? When someone joins an association or group, it usually means that the person agrees to follow to the ethical standard established by the group. So when you guys are going into this field and you guys graduate and you guys work in the field, we assume that means that you are aware of what's going on when it comes to what this organization or this field believes is right and wrong, and that you will also operate in those terms as well. Okay, so here I've hyperlinked three organizations that are really big in this field. This is the ACA, or American Counseling Association Code of Ethics, the APA, American Psychological Association, Ethical Principles of Psychologists and Code of Conduct, and the ASCA, Ethical Standards. There's actually even more websites at the end of this chapter, so please feel free to explore the other ones, but these three for sure I want you guys to be aware of. Obviously, I'm not asking you guys to read through the Code of Conduct because they could be, a lot of pages, but to be aware that there are these resources for you and that you can review them and refer to them in the future is really, really important. And then now let's talk about two different types of ethics. The first one is mandatory ethics. It's influenced and shaped in conjunction with legal standards. So basically what that means is these are things that you have to abide by because it's also part of the law. Okay, so these types of ethical dilemmas or whatever, usually it is also dictated by what is considered legal or illegal. And then there's aspirational ethics. So just in case you don't know what the word aspirational is, aspirational means to aspire to, which also means to be influenced and basically try to get to this place. Okay, so aspirational ethics means we all should try to conduct ourselves in this type of ethical perspective. Okay, inspirational is another word that is associated often with the word aspirational, but inspirational means something that influences you, something that motivates you to do something, whereas the other one, you want to get to that place, okay, which is aspirational. It promotes ethical behavior based on a broad spectrum of aspirations such as justice and respect for the rights and dignity of persons. And in aspirational ethics, there's two types. There's virtues and principle. Virtues as internal moral processes and on who one is. So this one is this the best thing for my client because of the way that you're going to behave, okay? Whereas principles is concerned with what one does and implies a certain level of obligation to act in certain ways. So in that sense, it means, what should I do, okay, in this situation? Important to multicultural clientele because you also need a level of flexibility. Again, remember, different cultures have different perspectives, and we want to put that into consideration as well. Okay, laws. Agreed upon rules by society that set forth the basic principles for living together as a group. So an example would be like, when you guys are driving down the street, usually when you're driving on the right side of the street, not the left side of the street in America, right? And the rules are there so that you don't get into an accident, that we stop at a red light and we go on a green light, right? Because if we both go at a green light and a red light together at the same time, most likely you're going to hit traffic, cause traffic accidents or something like that. So all of us together agree that this is how we're supposed to work. Okay, so there's criminal law, which pertains to behaviors which are crimes. So that would be rape, fraud, or acts of violence. And there's also civil law, which pertains to people and group interests and rights which are non-criminal in nature. So that means like, honoring a contract, personal injury, divorce or custodial rights, and of course, property interests. So when you own a house, what are the rules or what are the laws that you have to abide by, right? All right, malpractice tort basically means non-criminal wrong that involves an injury. So that means careless, reckless, negligent, and sometimes intentional behavior of a third party when the behavior is the proximate cause of injury to another. So an example would be physical punishment by parents. In some cultures are considered acceptable, right? But if we're in America, there's also certain rules that we have to also abide by as well. And when it comes to counseling, we might be mandated by law, depending on the state that you live in, to report these acts of violence, okay? Based on a general principle that holds professionals responsible for practices that harm clients. So basically we need to know that is something that should happen, but we should also know this is how things are supposed to be, and then basically follow the core tenet of do no harm to your client. Ignorance of the law is not a defense for a violation of the law. So basically what that means is just because you didn't know doesn't mean that you're going to get away with it, okay, that you're innocent. Let's say that you killed someone and you said, well, I didn't know that was illegal. People are going to say, well, actually, you kind of should have known, right? And this is something that we do not condone, and you cannot just use the excuse that you didn't know, therefore it was okay to do this. Multicultural competencies is really important again in this field of ethics. Child abuse is illegal and counselors are legally bound to report child abuse. Counselors are required to break confidentiality to adhere to the law. Some cultures, corporal punishment, which is basically physical punishment, as normative parenting practice, and counselor is faced with mandatory reporting requirements, advocacy of family members, and being culturally sensitive. So again, that makes it more complicated, right? Because as people of a minority, your value system might be a little bit different, right? How many of us were hit as a child, right? And other parents, some of them culturally will say, well, that's fine, right? Because you're teaching your child how to behave properly. So it becomes a little bit more ambiguous or more multifaceted, as the word that we used before, in the sense of how we see the world. Now let's talk about the decision-making steps. Here's a guideline for making ethical decisions. The first thing you want to do is identify the problem or dilemma. Dilemma is just another word for problem. 2, identify the potential issues involved. 3, review the relevant ethic codes, such as the ones that were hyperlinked in the previous couple of slides, also the ones at the end of the chapter, but also when you start working, they will also provide you with their ethical code of standards as well. 4, know the applicable laws and regulations. 5, obtain consultation, which basically means maybe talking to your superiors, your coworkers, people that you are able to consult, a lawyer as well. 6, consider possible and probable courses of action. So basically means let's think of all the possibilities, the options that you can choose from. 7 is enumerate the consequences of various decisions. Enumerate is just basically, again, making a list of all the possible results that could happen so that we know exactly what may happen if it becomes this decision or this decision or this decision. 8 is choose what appears to be the best course of action. Its collaborative consultation is a key component to most ethical decision-making models and allows for multiple views when addressing difficult issues. Okay. Choosing to be a counselor and ethical motivation. So there are right and wrong reasons to become a counselor. Here are some wrong reasons to become a counselor. You need to be dominant. You need to be needed and loved, to be a voyeur on the other's lives. And a voyeur is just a fancy word of someone who likes to watch other people's business, okay? Someone who's kind of watching in the background, right? To be an omnipotent healer. Omnipotent basically means all-powerful. So you might feel like you're like a healer, right? You're so powerful, you're so smart, you're so better, and that's not necessarily a very good reason to become a counselor. You are trying to escape your own life, okay, as a sense of like, your life is boring, your life is horrible, so you're going to try and go into other people's lives and pretend to live their lives instead. And then, of course, to cure themselves of curing others. So one thing is, a lot of people go into psychology and counseling because they're actually there to fix themselves. And I actually do see this a lot of the time when it comes to my students, right? Some of you guys, when I have met you and talked to you, I don't think you're actually ready to help anyone because you're trying to fix yourself, right? Or understand yourself. And so I'm not here to tell you one way or the other. That's not my job. I'm here to teach about, counseling and all that stuff. But if you are trying to fix yourself, that's really important. That's really great. But that's not one reason why you should go into the counseling field as a professional. Okay. Use clients to fulfill their own needs, to nurture others, to feel powerful or important, to win acceptance, admiration, respect, or awe from other people. Unethical when counselors are primarily meeting their own needs and imposing personal values in the counseling relationship. So this would be considered unethical if you are doing this for your own benefit, right? Like you feel better than any. It's great to help and feel great that you've helped someone, right? But if this is your primary reason, is like it makes you feel good, it makes you feel important and stuff like that, then you might want to consider another field because then that's not something that we're looking for as a person. Okay. There's also multiple relationships, which is an ethical issue. When a counselor relates to the client in a professional role and concurrently or sequentially occupies one or more other professional or non-professional roles with a client. So concurrently means happening at the same time. So let's say that you have a client and then you're also doing other things while that person is still a client as well. And sequentially basically means maybe right afterwards, you two are going to start a business together or something. Then that would be sequentially. It happens afterwards in a series of order, basically. So, and that means becoming their friend or intimate partner, which basically usually means sexual in this situation, a peer, or financial partner, meaning maybe doing business with them. Not all multiple relationships are harmful or unethical, but some can be devastating. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when it comes to having dual relationships or multiple relationships and when it's okay. All right, sexual relationships with a client is a big issue. So let's talk about that right now. It's illegal in some states. Most consistently violated ethical standard among psychologists, and second most common with counselors. So there you already know that there are people who should not be in this field because they don't follow or adhere or respect ethical codes when it comes to this. The American Counseling Association, or the ACA, says that there must be a 5-year period between professional and intimate relationship, which means that if you decide to date or have sex with your client, it should be 5 years after the date that you last saw them in a professional situation. Okay. Can the counselor list potential harms that can still happen to the client? So I actually hear about this all the time where people are like, but, why not be able to have sex with your counselor? And there is a major issue, which is a power dynamic, right? Imagine a counselor where the client has told them all of these deep-rooted secrets. The counselor who knows all this stuff can use them against that person, right? So that's actually very unethical. And it's very common, unfortunately, but doesn't mean that you guys should. Just because you're like, well, a lot of other people are doing it, why can't I? I'm hoping that you will never, ever sleep with one of your clients, okay? Have I seen people do it? Yes, I have, unfortunately. And it's very, very awkward and uncomfortable because sometimes I feel like, like I can't recommend a client to you because I don't know what you're going to do. What other ethical issues are you breaking, when it comes to that? But yeah, it's just a very, very uncomfortable situation. All right, there's 6 principles for counselors to consider. Number 1 is beneficence, which means to do good, promote well-being and health. The second is non-malfeasance, is to do no harm, prevent harmful actions and effects. And then autonomy, recognize and respect independence and self-determination. Justice, promote fairness and equality in dealings. 5 is fidelity, to be responsible to clients and honor agreements. And veracity, to be truthful and honest in dealings. So these are the code of conducts, the things that you basically should operate from, right? Is basically to do good, to do no harm, to let the person decide what they want to do, to also be fair in your dealings, which basically means that are you going to treat everyone the same way? Or do you treat people of a certain ethnicity better than you treat another one? Then that would be injustice, right? Fidelity means to be responsible to the client and basically be loyal to them, okay? And then veracity basically means to be truthful. Now let's talk about professional responsibility. Counselors have the responsibility to their clients and must be accountable for client welfare and rights, which basically means that you are held in charge of basically and responsible for the welfare of that client and also their rights. Malpractice claim can happen, which is basically when you breach confidentiality without appropriate justification. So you're breaking some of the ethical issues that you promised to do to your client and without any specific reason or without letting them know. Counselors have a responsibility to the public, to other professionals, to agencies and institutions in which they work, and to the counseling profession itself. So as a counselor, when you go into this field, you promise to do good and all that other stuff that we saw in that previous slide to the public, to your coworkers, to where you work, but also just into the field itself. Okay, that means that you must be competent, which means you need to be educated and experienced in the field that you're working in. You have to respect client rights, maintain confidentiality, and promote client welfare. We are expecting you, once you get into this field, to be a professional. And part of being a professional means to follow ethical conduct expectations. The importance of multiculturalism in ethics. There's a universalistic approach, which means having ethical codes that reflect what is common across cultures while honoring the ethics of each individual culture. So when you talk about ethics, usually in a field, they have considered multicultural issues, right, into their thought process when they were creating it. And we want to actually also see the bigger picture, which is the well-being of everyone with respect to the minor differences that come with each culture. Okay, beginner counselors, they tend to have some difficulties because they're new, right? And we're talking about cultural insensitivity, racism, oppression, and discrimination, which are all wrong. Okay, sometimes you're unaware of the subtle ways that you do that, and those are also known as microaggressions. what microaggressions is like, let's say a Caucasian counselor says to an African American, maybe not noticeable to the Caucasian counselor, but picked up by the African American client and affect the working alliance. So something like, oh, you speak really well, right? And that might be considered a compliment, and I'm sure the Caucasian counselor might see it as a compliment. But let's say that if it is an African American client, they're going to say, what, for a black person, that I speak well? Do you say that to a white person or a Caucasian person when you're counseling? So, and the thing is, a lot of the times people just don't seem to be aware of that. And we need to now learn more about cultural competency and see what things we need to avoid, because it actually affects a certain minority group in a very severe way where they might not come back for counseling again afterwards. Okay, so again, microaggressions are things that might seem like a compliment, but there's a tinge of, but you are still an other, and this is why I'm complimenting you, because you're better than what I expect you to be. Unethical towards the client would be discrimination, harassing them, or demeaning them on the basis of culture, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. So I just wanted to kind of define all those things really quickly. Discriminate means you don't want to work with them or you don't like them for one reason or another, usually because of their ethnicity or cultural background. Harassing means maybe yelling at them or maybe sexually harassing them as well, which is giving them unwanted attention. And then of course demeaning meaning to make that person feel less than, okay? It is important to recognize that everyone feels pain, but pain is felt differently in different cultures. Okay, so what would be embarrassing for one culture might not be embarrassing for another. So when they're sharing that, you should not demean them or harass them about that. Okay, see them from where they are coming from. Okay, trying to understand. And the only way you can understand those things is if you have an open mind and if you're educated and experienced to understand that you and your value system is not the end all of everything. That there are various types of perspectives, and we want to be able to be open-minded enough to be empathetic to that, right? Multicultural competencies involve three main components. Number one, an awareness of one's cultural values and biases, cultural awareness of your client's worldview, and then using culturally appropriate counseling practices. Okay, so let's explain that really quickly. Okay, so there are three multicultural competencies that we're hoping that you all understand. The first one is that you are aware of who you are and your value system. And then to also be able to be aware of your client's value systems and their perspective. And then three is using counseling techniques that are respectful to that person or your client, basically. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about counselor competence. Professors' responsibility to foster your learning of these aspects of competence and provide ongoing evaluation and appraisal to address the inability of some students to achieve counseling competencies that might impede performance. So what that is saying is, as your teacher, basically, my responsibility is to show you about all the things that might happen in the future when it comes to counseling. Can I show you everything? No, but I can talk to you in general terms, right? And whenever I see something inappropriate, it is my responsibility to point those things out. So let's say that if we were in a classroom and you guys were sharing something that might have been seen or can be deemed as unethical, I will point that out to you. And when you guys are going through your internship and you guys share what's going on, me and your supervisor, if we see something that's unethical or incorrect, it's our responsibility to step in and say, hey, maybe you should consider this instead, because this is how, we are believed to and we are expected to behave in this situation. Okay, counseling educators assist students in securing remedial assistance when needed. So basically that means when we see a student that doesn't have the expectations that are required of this person in this counseling field, we're going to try and help you in one way or another, whether it means to give you more readings, right? To give you some help or offer you another way of getting an understanding of that. Okay. Recommend dismissal from training programs when supervisees are unable to provide competent services. So if you are really unethical, we will probably recommend that you might reconsider and major in something else because it's not going to help you and it's not going to help the field as well. Okay. If you're going to be unethical and we know that you're purposely going to be unethical, you choose to because you disagree with the field, then why are you in this field? Okay. You should probably do something else. Okay, once the student graduates, it is the graduate's responsibility to remain competent. So after you graduate from here, you know, you still need to continue to learn and to educate yourself and to experience stuff if you don't experience those things in terms of, let's say, cultural competency, okay? I can only help you so much, or other instructors can help you so much. But after that, you're saying, hey, I want to be in this field, which means that I will take responsibility for myself and I'm going to learn more. If the professional is not competent to treat a certain client problem, number one, so let's say that if we don't think that you are qualified to help other people, here are some things that we might do, which is limit services and refer clients to other helping professionals who can meet the needs of one's client in a given area, and then consider expanding one's competence base. So give the clients options of professionals to choose from. So one thing that if you, let's say you're doing your internship and you realize like, hey, how come my supervisor won't give me any clients? Potentially one realistic thing is they're like, I don't know if you're ready to actually see clients. So they won't give it to you because they have ethical obligations as well, which is to do no harm, right? And I know you're learning, but your supervisor is also maybe saying you're not there yet, right? So if that is something that's happening, you might want to have an honest and open discussion with your supervisor and say, hi, is there a reason why, I'm not getting the clients, okay? And hopefully your supervisor will let you know, maybe you need a little bit more training or let's talk a little bit more because, there is a reason why. Okay. Another option is suspend services and refer to several appropriate professionals while you receive sufficient training and supervision in the specialty area. So you might have your clients taken away from you once they realize, hey, this is not good yet. This is not going to be effective. So we're going to give you some training. And then you go through the training and you go forward. No one is going to judge you. Okay. This is to make sure that you and your clients are getting the best results. So we want you to be culturally competent, and we also want our clients to be able to benefit from spending time with you. Okay. Third is to terminate professional responsibilities and make appropriate referrals. So that means maybe saying, you know what, we're going to take away your clients because this is not the right time just yet, and we want to make sure that you go and get the proper training before you come back. Okay. And four, if there is no one to whom the counselor can refer, the counselor should seek education on the presenting problem and seek supervision of the work with the client. So in that sense, if something is going on, you might want to postpone the relationship and then go back to school or some sort of training. Okay. Again, all of this is not to say, get out of this field. Okay. This is going, hey, we don't necessarily know if you are ready just yet. Maybe you need a little bit more training. And this is why teachers can get very frustrated with some students who don't read or don't pay attention, is that then they complain afterwards, the students, like, hey, how come I can't do this or whatever? I believe that your coworkers or my coworkers, your co-teachers or your other teachers actually are trying their best, okay? And usually they're actually doing really quality instruction. But sometimes the students don't necessarily choose to. I'm not saying most of you guys, I'm saying most of you guys actually are pretty trained, right? And are there. You just need more education as you go along through this program. But there are some students that choose not to study or anything or even care about the field or, don't really have a passion in this field. And that can be problematic. Okay, let's talk about client rights and welfare. So there's three things that we're going to talk about in the next slide, which are confidentiality, privileged communication, and informed consent. All right, let's talk about privacy and confidentiality. So confidentiality and privileged communication is all about privacy. Okay, so privileged communication is a legal term referring to a right held by your clients to prevent therapeutic information from entering into a legal proceeding. So basically, let's say that the counselor or the therapist is being pulled into court, that you should be able to say what was discussed between me and the client are and should remain private. Clients, not the counselor, have control over who has access to what they have said in therapy. So the client, technically, though, can give you permission to then release that information, but they will need to tell you and also most likely fill out some sort of document. Clients are protected from having their communication disclosed in the court of law, but you need to also note that not all privileged communication, if the mental health professional is not legally certified or licensed in the state of practice. So basically means that if they're not in this field, okay, so if they're not licensed, they don't have to. Okay, so we're talking about once you become a professional in the field, let's say you get a certification, and stuff like that, then you are bound to privacy. But if you are like a life coach, which has no educational requirements, it's just kind of a cheerleader person, then it doesn't necessarily apply. Okay, and your client should know that as well. All right, in order for communication to be privileged or basically confidential, there are four things. The first is communication must originate in confidence that will not be disclosed. So when you first meet with your client, you're going to set some boundaries, right? And one of them will be everything that we talk about will be between us. Unless you're an intern, let's say, then your supervisor also has the right to know, or depending on the agency that you work for. But then that would also be noted to the client as well. The second is confidentiality must be essential to the full and satisfactory maintenance of the relationship. So building on that confidentiality is how your relationship is going to be successful, right? And then, the client will actually talk about their things. Three, in the opinion of the greater community, the relationship must be one that should be noted by care and persistent effort. So basically, you're going to try and make sure that everything is happening is in confidentiality. And four, injury to the relationship by disclosure of the communication must be greater than the benefit gained by the correct disposal of litigation regarding the information. So basically is we're trying to protect you from any harm, right? If a client waives privilege, the door for privacy is unlocked. And usually, like I said before, there should probably be some paperwork that is signed that says, I hereby the client waive my rights to confidentiality or whatever. And then that means that then the therapist can go into court, let's say, and talk about the situation between the two. Counselors who encounter a request or requirement to participate in a legal proceeding should consult with an attorney. Again, if you're going to be called into court, usually you should have an attorney to let you know exactly what's going on, so you know exactly what your rights are as a counselor and as a therapist in a court proceeding. HIPAA and the privacy rule. In the 1990s, concern over the privacy of health services consumers issued due to technology. So what that is saying is, because of technology, we were unsure if anything was kept private. And one of the major issues was a fax machine. Do you guys know what a fax machine is? If you are young, you probably don't know, or you probably know that there's a machine in an office that's known as a fax, but you probably don't even know how to send it a fax, right? I don't even remember how to send a fax. But anyways, back in the 1990s, before the internet happened, there were these machines that it's kind of like a photocopy machine through the phone. So let's say you have a client who has medical records. So we communicate with the medical doctor and say, hey, we need the paperwork for this client. And so they'll say, okay, I will fax it to you. So what it does is they feed it through a machine, and through the phone lines, we get a printout at our office. But the thing is, usually at most offices, there's one fax machine in a room. And so we cannot guarantee that people will respect that privacy of those medical records so that only that specific counselor gets that information, right? And so the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, also known as the USDHHS, became involved with this. It created the HIPAA, which is Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is basically to ensure privacy of consumers while at the same time allowing for efficient transfer of information. Imagine, let's say we need the medical records, right? Yeah, they can send it through mail and that could take a week depending on where, let's say it's from California to New York or whatever, right? Um, or we can have a delivery service, like someone comes and picks it up for the medical office and delivers it to your office. But again, that can cost money. With the fax machine, it's really fast and also very efficient. However, again, we don't know who gets to see it in that office. Could the secretary see it? Could another counselor see it? We don't know. And this is why some places when you work, they will ask you to become HIPAA trained or HIPAA compliant so that we know that you guys are aware of privacy and respect the privacy of your clients. So the USD HHS privacy rule, use and disclosure of client information term protected healthcare information, also known as PHI. Okay. Information on any past, present, or future mental or physical health of clients, including payment information. Any information that might or can be used to identify a person. Okay, so again, we talk about privacy, and so there are these agencies that were created or departments that were created to talk about and to train people, to educate people, make them aware that there are privacy issues that need to be respected if you are going to be in this field. Now let's talk about exceptions to confidentiality, which basically means situations where you're allowed to break that privacy and let other people know for one reason or another. There are three global issues that require a breach of confidentiality. Number one is when it deals with minors and further harm or continued abuse or neglect. So if your client says, I beat my child until they black out, right, you have the right to report that. And it should not be a surprise to your client because, and we'll talk about this later on, which is about informed consent. Before you start any type of counseling, you let them know actually these three things, okay? And you tell them, in the course of our relationship as a therapist and a client, if you talk about abuse of children or the other two, we have the right to report you, okay? So when a client still is aware of that, acknowledges it, and still tells you, then you do have the right and say, well, we talked about the fact that, if you mention any of these things, that we do have a right to report you because we don't want your children to be in harm. Okay. The second is incapacitated and vulnerable adults. So that means people who might have mental illness, mental deficiency, mental disorder, physical illness, or disability, maybe of their advanced age, chronic use of drugs, chronic intoxication, lacking sufficient understanding or capacity to make or communicate responsible decisions. So if you do something to a person who is, let's say, disabled, then yeah, we also still have a right because they're not able to, let's say, protect themselves, and so we would have to report. And then third is serious and foreseeable harm to self or others. The counselor overriding responsibilities to protect an intended identifiable victim from harm that could result from a client's actions. And it's really well known is this this law basically called duty to warn. However, it is not in all states. Okay, so the duty to warn hyperlink right there actually will link you to all the states that it is mandatory, which means required, or not required, or maybe in between, depending on the situation. It's really interesting. We would expect, if you wanted to, if your client wanted to hurt someone, that we would be able to tell those people, right? But it really does depend. And the major case that happened is this one called Tarasoff versus the Board of Regents of the University of California. And I believe it was at Berkeley, the UC Berkeley. And basically, I've also hyperlinked the situation, which is about a client of one of the school's counseling office and how he told the therapist that he was intending to kill this woman, this student. and she was never born, and he basically did kill her. So I want you to read through it. It's a really quick synopsis of it. There's a lot of discussion about it as well, but it's really important. It actually basically said, hey, you know, if you're going to do harm to yourself or other people, we need to be able to report this. And I'll give you another one that is really big, which is basically a 5150, which is when, okay, here, I'll give you a example. Britney Spears. Remember when she kind of like shaved her head, or not kind of, she did shave her head, hit a car with an umbrella, and then she was actually called on a 5150. And the reason why was all of that. The reason why was that she locked herself in the bathroom with her kids. And so there was a justification that there was potential harm to her children, which is how they're able to then put her in a 5150, which is a basically kind of a mental illness or a mental health check. And I believe that they can keep them for a certain amount of time to make sure that she or whoever it is not a danger to themselves or other people. All right, so here are some more exceptions to confidentiality when client introduces their mental condition as an element in a court case. Mental stability of either spouse is introduced in a child custody case. When the counselor is working for the court, such as in conducting a court-ordered evaluation examination. When the client is suing the counselor. When the counselor believes that the client is in need of immediate hospitalization. So these are other reasons why a person can break confidentiality, is because of all these things that could also potentially happen, right? Now let's talk about confidentiality in HIV. The dilemma between protecting their clients' rights of confidentiality and a duty to warn when clients do not inform their sexual partners of their medical condition. So the ACA basically says that when clients disclose that they have a disease commonly known to be both communicable and life-threatening, counselors may be justified in disclosing information to identifiable third parties if they're known to be at high risk of contracting the disease. What this means, though, is practice of disclosure may be permissible, but it is not necessarily legal or mandated. Okay, so this is something that's really interesting, which is that HIV and AIDS is no longer seen as a death sentence. Before, when you contracted AIDS, or HIV actually, and it develops into AIDS, you were going to die. However, with modern medication, you actually can live a long life, a happy life, with medication that you take. So then it becomes another issue there, right? Again, also, I believe in California, before, if you were known to purposely, let's say, give someone else HIV, it was considered a felony. It is no longer considered a felony. It's now considered a misdemeanor. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about responsibility too, self-responsibility. When you guys are dating someone, okay, or hooking up with someone, you millennials and you Gen Zs and some Gen Xers and obviously other people as well, do you talk about health? Do you talk and ask them about their HIV status, or let's say STD status? Um, isn't it your responsibility to ask those things? I know it kind of breaks the romance or that mood, that vibe, as you guys are calling it nowadays, but isn't it really your responsibility to ask as well? Um, Here's something that I'll let you know. There are some people who don't have sex with other people without some sort of STD test, right? So whose responsibility is it? Uh, it's easy to blame the other person, but sometimes people don't even know what diseases they have either, right? So, and I'm not saying that as an excuse. I'm just saying, do you value your own life very much? Do you value yourself? Do you, can you ask those questions before having sex with someone or doing some sort of sexual activity? Doesn't have to always have sex, right? So I want you to think about that when it comes to HIV, because I think a lot of people think that it's criminal and all this other stuff. But again, with modern medications, you actually live a very long and happy and healthy and successful life, even while having HIV. Okay, and also now there's also drugs that prevent the transmission of HIV, and then also uh, Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Unless there is an identifiable victim and the clients refuse to behave in a manner that protects his person, the covenant of confidentiality should not be broken. Let's talk about informed consent now. There are three elements: competence, informed, and voluntariness. And let's talk about those three in the next slide. All right, competence. Able to engage in rational thought to a sufficient degree to make competent decisions about his or her or their life. Basically, that means the person must be aware of what's going on and understand what's going on. Okay. Minors cannot give informed consent. You must get consent form from the guardian or a caretaker, a parent, or something like that. Minors can give assent. Assent basically means approval. They can go along with it, but informed consent is something that a person who is aware of what's going on. A child, a minor, might not be able to understand all the sophistications of what the rules are, so they cannot give us consent, but they can give assent, which is, okay, I will do this. Okay? Informed means a person is given relevant information about the procedures to be performed in a language that he or she or they can understand. So when you first meet your client in a therapeutic relationship, usually you set down all the boundaries or the rules, okay? These are things that we can talk about. These are things that if you do talk about, I might have to report you, okay? Or, all this other information, like you have to pay this much to receive counseling. All of that information should be discussed and addressed and agreed upon, informed basically, on the first day. Okay, before any therapy happens, all of this should happen. If your place does not provide that, that is something that you need to question them. Okay, ask your supervisor, hey, is there an informed consent? Why isn't the fact that, we don't go through this or whatever? Okay, and you cannot just give them the paper to read. Okay, you should actually sit down and read through the entire informed consent with your client in the language that they are most comfortable in understanding the information. Okay, and as you read through it out loud with them, if they look like they're questioning what you just said, you need to say, should I explain a little bit further on this topic for you? Okay, because informed consent is really important that you sign it with them knowing what the rules were. Okay, if they decide to break the rules, that's another situation, right? But if they say, I didn't know that I couldn't do this, that would be unfair to them. Okay, so then it would not have been an informed and respected relationship. And of course, voluntariness. Consent is given freely by the client. Okay, so they have to want to and agree upon all the rules. If they don't agree upon it, you don't have to give them counseling. Does that make sense? Even if it's mandated, right? Because mandated, let's say the person is on probation for a crime that they committed, right? And they said, hey, you can also go to counseling, and then we can not let you, let's say, go to jail, right? Or prison. So that person still has a choice. They can go to counseling and not, let's say, go to prison. Or they can go, I don't want to go into counseling. Then they can go back and get the other consequence, right? Does that make sense? So you always need to let them know that they have a choice. They can stop it at any time they want to. They can change to a different counselor if they want to. But all that stuff is in the informed consent. All right, here is some of the information that is usually discussed in an informed consent on the first day that you meet with a client. The purpose of counseling, the goals, the techniques, the procedures, the limitations, potential risks, benefits of services, the counselor's qualification, which means your education, credentials, relevant experience, continuation of services upon the incapacitation or the death of the counselor, and other pertinent information. There's also more, I'm sure, but these are the main ones that we will discuss within the informed consent. Okay? Counselors make sure that the clients understand implications and diagnosis, the intended use of tests and reports, the fees, and then the billing arrangement. So they should all know this, okay? Whether or not they have insurance, we let them know too, like it says that your insurance will pay this for you and all that other stuff, right? There are limitations that you need to talk about too. Hey, what happens if counseling is not effective? And that could possibly happen, right? Clear information about their records, to participate in ongoing counseling plans, refuse any services or modality changes so they can say no to certain things in therapy, and to understand the consequences of any refusals. So let's say that they choose not to do this, then it might not necessarily be as effective, but it was their choice, their decision to, let's say, reject whatever was offered. Couples and family and group work counseling ethics. Key differences when working with couples and families is that you're ensuring group confidentiality. Now you're worried about not just one person, but like a whole family or a whole group of people. Appropriate treatment of the family as a group as well as the members of the group. So for some people, you might meet as a group for a little bit, but then you also meet with each of them individually as well. So what happens there? So counselors are not to disclose confidences or secrets provided by one member in an individual session to other members of the couple or family without consent. So you should talk to them and say, hey, can I share this information about how you're feeling about your partner when I meet them next, right? You need to talk about permission and stuff like that. Otherwise, you don't bring those things up. Counselor must be clear that the primary client is the family. So it's the big group as an entity, as one person, basically, right? Like the whole group as one thing. Counselors must take care to get informed consent from each client as well. And that's true. You will want to go through each of them so that they all understand as well. Because not everyone in a family will understand the exact same information, right? Some people might be confused about one question or another. Ethics is applied to group types. So it depends on what type of group that you're meeting up with. Group management and also communication of group parameters. So exactly how are we going to talk to each other? That means parameter, like what is the things that are going to go on and how do we know what's happening? You need to let your client know or your clients know. You need to let them know the purpose and the goals of the group, and it should be clear. Group worker must monitor progress of the group goals. Counselors cannot assure that group members will maintain group confidentiality. So what that is saying is when you are doing, let's say, a therapy group, right? Not necessarily a family, but just a group of people, that you will be responsible for keeping things private. However, you cannot guarantee that your group members are not going to talk about you. Does that make sense? Because you cannot control a person at all, right? Other people. They might do things that you don't want them to do, right? And so you need to let them know that in a group circumstance that confidentiality is no longer guaranteed. Group workers apply and modify knowledge, skills, technique appropriate to group type and stage and be multiculturally sensitive. So again, depending on the type of group, all those things can also apply as well. And that you as a counselor need to apply those things and be aware of them. Individuals in group counseling need to be screened before being accepted into the group to make sure that each person is appropriate for the group. Protect members from dysfunctional group members. Okay, so this is something that's also interesting and you might not all know, is usually when, let's say we're going to start a therapy group about domestic violence, right? Before you create that group, you need to actually interview each of them individually. You want to get a feel of what kind of personality they are to make sure that the whole group will be productive. Okay. If there's one person who talks a lot, let's say, right, and it's going to talk the majority of the time in all group counseling, it's going to disrupt the flow, right? So you might not want them in that group. You might actually recommend them as individual instead. Okay. And the reason why is because we want the group to be productive. Okay. And if there's someone who's going to be disruptive, then it's not going to help the purpose of that counseling. Let's talk about school counseling ethics. School counselor ethics are impacted by federal laws related to academics and education. So there's this thing called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. It guarantees certain rights to parents of students to protect and have access to their clients' information. Counselors working in schools may have additional challenges around maintaining and breaching confidentiality, but it also is different from others working there. So each person, depending on your responsibilities, it might be different responsibilities and expectations. Since they are minors, requires parents to participate, because it can be helpful, but it also can be more complicated with parents' help, right? You know, some parents are not necessarily the most easygoing, right? So they might question things, which they have the right to do, right? But it can overcomplicate things sometimes. Counseling and group work may take place in a classroom or rooms that are not meant for counseling. So it might not necessarily be private enough and other people might be able to hear or something, right? And that's something that you also need to pay attention to as well when you're working in the school setting. And let's end our lecture on technology assisted distance counseling ethics. Isn't it so perfect that we are talking about this last while we are living in this pandemic in 2020? We're talking about COVID, obviously, right? So for some people, they don't feel comfortable during this time to go out face to face, meet the therapist, because the therapist might be meeting a bunch of people, right? And so there might be health issues and you do not want to put them at risk. Again, that is an ethical issue. Health, do no harm, right? All right, here's some considerations on this slide and the next one that we need to think about when it comes to technology-assisted distance counseling. Number one, counselors consider the appropriateness of online counseling and address limitations such as misunderstandings. What we're saying in that is that because you are not face to face, you don't actually see their entire bodies, so you don't know if you are reading their body correctly, their body language correctly, or whatever. Okay, so you want to address the fact that there might be some misunderstandings. Two, counselors explain the limits of confidentiality, particular to online counseling. So as a counselor, when you're looking at your client's face, you know, usually it's just their chest up, right? You don't know who else is in that room with them. And so they could be listening to the client and you doing therapy, and that it means that that's breaking confidentiality. Three, counselors explain and notify clients about certain aspects of how confidential information is handled. Who has access to the computers? So you need to let them know that your computer, their computer anyways, is not necessarily encrypted or protected. What if someone is able to get into that computer, program it to record, or a client, someone else there might be able to read into their emails, hack into it, and all that stuff. So there's that potential as well. Four, counselors use security technology, software, and secure sites to protect client information and communication such as encryption, firewall technology, digital shredders, password protection for computers and files, HIPAA-compliant web conferencing tools. So that is a lot right there, right? But there's all these things. Usually, you cannot do counseling over FaceTime or Zoom or Google Hangouts because none of those things are necessarily compliant to confidentiality. So there actually would be software that needs to potentially be downloaded and encrypted passwords and stuff like that on both computers and also on access to all this stuff. Okay, so that's something that we also need to talk about when it comes to it too. You can't just, you know, have a text chat because we don't know what privacy is because someone else could have access to it. You know, I have my text messages access to on my computer. So when someone texts me, it also shows up on my computer sometimes. And so that means, let's say that I am texting someone and someone else is using my computer, they could read all of my texts, right? Potentially. So we want to make sure that all that is protected. All right, 5. Professional counselors identify foreseeable situations in which confidentiality must be breached in light of the law in both the state in which the client is located and the state in which the counselor is licensed. So when you do therapy online, you can actually do therapy in other states as well. But what are the rules of that state and what are the rules of the state that you live in? Okay, and this is one reason why some people will only do online therapy within their state because then they know the rules, the laws, and the ethics. 6. Professional counselors identify clients, verify identities of clients, and obtain alternative methods of contacting clients in emergency situations, including identifying local alternatives, professional help in case of a crisis. So let's say that a client says that they want to commit suicide, right? We need to make sure that we know where they are because on a computer, they could be in a totally different place than they are, right? Technically, you can say, hi, I'm in Texas, but you're actually in California. And we would not necessarily know. So we would need to have other ways of reaching you in case something happens. 7. There are certain circumstances in which a client must waive a right to privileged communication because of the nature of online services. Again, there might be other reasons why, and they need to know. And 8, find cost-free sites for clients when possible. Be aware of the client's local environment and culture, as well as provide a barrier-free environment for clients and disabilities. So in that sense, maybe they do need a local person instead of doing online, and you should be able to offer those things as well.